So we begin another West London VR race preview, this time the Harrow Hall, starting here on the beach at Ruislip Lido. That is a reservoir lake with a false beach. On the left is a little railway which goes around to various stations around Ruislip Woods. And here we have on the left, that's the entrance to the railway station, as we go past the cafe, and we're still going past the false beach here. Now this is all flat, this is a reservoir as I say, so we're going to go around the reservoir and out, and then the real racing begins. Now this around 16k as usual with one of our races. It undulates a little bit, but this whole race is about the hill at Harrow towards the end. So just before the end we go over the hill at Harrow where the race will undoubtedly be decided. We're pretty sure about that. And then there's a downhill and a flat towards the finish. Now of course if a group of a nice little swan sitting there on the left for us, this is a nature reserve these days. In fact the lake on the right, perhaps in the, I don't know when, but certainly in the 1930s and 1940s, was very much seen as a leisure centre for Londoners to come out and do water sports. There's a lot of water skiing and that sort of thing on there. But of course, in modern thinking, we can't have all that. We've got to have it as a nature reserve. So now you're not allowed to go in the water. Quite the complete reverse of the way it was originally set up, and it's for the ducks and swans and other wildlife. But going back to the race, as we come out of the Ruislip Lido, turn left onto a proper road, and the race begins. Now, as I say, it's undulating, apart from this big hill at Harrow at the end, where we go up into almost a time-warped little town of Harrow on the Hill, which we'll talk more about later. That's where the race will be decided. If you get to the top in a group, there's a fast downhill and then a sort of shallow downhill to the finish. So it'll be a race downhill if you get over the top of the Harrow Hill in a group. If it's all in spread out into solo riders, then I think whoever gets to the top of the hill has got a very, very good chance of winning the race. We shall see. So a nice little drop just down to this roundabout, but then we go up a little bump as we head towards Ruislip at the moment. So we just come out of Ruislip Lido and Ruislip Woods, and this is going to take us down towards Ruislip High Street. We're not actually going to ride down it, but as I say, slightly undulating here, but nothing too onerous. And remember as well that the speeds you do RGT Wahoo races in a peloton, most of these won't be too telling on you. I think it's fair to say though that the tactic of some of the fast riders on each of these little bumps is to put a little bit of pressure on, because it does shed one or two people out of the group along the way, and the smaller the group gets, there is more chance of splits, and of course if somebody splits, it's very, very hard to get back on a group once you dropped the speed they're going. So as I say, this is slightly undulating, nothing too onerous. We're heading towards Ruislip now. This is suburban London, so you know, expect lots of houses along the way. That's broadly what you're going to see in most of the scenery. I have taken it down a couple of little roads that make it a little bit greener than otherwise it would be, but these suburbs are relatively green anyway, as you can see with the trees here. What they term in Britain as a leafy suburb, because there's plenty of trees rather than just concrete. As I say, this is Ruislip. This was very much one of those places like Harrow that was, I suppose, populated during the 20th century when they built the railways out here. The railways that come out here are now largely part of the London Underground system. The fact is that Harrow and Ruislip served by the Metropolitan line, which was the very first underground railway in the world. That was around Baker Street, and then it stretched out both ways from there. It went down into the City of London and outwards towards places like Ruislip, Harrow, Amersham, and once upon a time many, many miles beyond that, right past Aylesbury. Most of the section up there has now been shut down or converted to a different line, and it now stops at Amersham. So another little bit of a dip here as we go over the River Pin. We're going to follow the line of the River Pin in a moment. We're going to turn left and follow that river. We won't actually see it, we're just running parallel to it, which means from a cycling point of view that we will be going along the bottom of a valley, so it'll be very flat for the next little section. We look forward to that. Just going past the old barn in Ruislip, which is, you can't get a very good view of that, but that's a very old barn remains from the farm when there was, of course, a rural area. And when they built the railways out here, first of all, this was all green fields, and it was a great opportunity for working Londoners to come out and have a holiday. So believe it or not, this London suburb would have been a holiday destination 100 years ago for people to come out and get out into the countryside. You see a couple of the old buildings here at the end of Ruislip High Street, very, very old, especially that one on the right there, which is a very, very old building just outside the church. Whereas what you will see in most of these London suburbs is a sort of various housing from various decades, and here we have sort of quite nice sized houses as in the keeping with Ruislip, or certainly the northern end of it. Typical commuter land. And of course most of the people who, I say most of the people, a lot of the people who live in these areas will of course work in central London because it is all built around the Metropolitan line. As I say, when the railway came out here, this is when this got swallowed up and all the fields converted to housing, and these very much dormitory places. You wouldn't necessarily want to come here and visit unless you're visiting somebody you know. I suppose like Ruislip Lido offers a nice countrified sort of set of woods and this little railway and beach there and everything. As I say, we're very much on the flat here because we are following the course of the River Pym, which is to our left, probably a couple of 100 metres the other side of the houses on our left. So now gradually coming out of Ruislip, we're at the top of what we might call Ruislip Manor now. We're heading towards Eastcote next, and again it's going to stay very, very flat because although there is a slight decline here, which you only notice coming the other way. Actually, I've never seemed to notice it when I'm riding in this direction, but it is really flat, and as I say, we are really following the River Pym Valley here, so the hills to either side of us as we go on the flat. Now we are going to turn right in a moment and slightly go up the side of the valley, so it's not all flat all the way to Harrow, but as I say, if you look at the trajectory, if you study the route, and you can on our website, we always put the rather GPS version of the route up there, and it has a profile and you'll be able to see that. You'll see that it's the hill at Harrow that is the deciding factor and the key to this race. The Harrow haul, you've got to haul yourself up that hill when we get there, and that's everything you're getting ready for. As I say, there are bumps along the way just to get your climbing legs warmed up, loosened up, and the old muscles working, but Harrow Hill is where it all happens. At the top of Harrow Hill, of course, is the famous school that Winston Churchill went to, which is probably always takes second place to Eton in the notoriety of great British public schools, but like Eton, the boys are supposed to wear jackets with tails on. I think this is saved now for more formal occasions rather than everyday wear, but they're nonetheless required to wear them for certain functions. Now, still on this flat road, we are at the top of Eastcote now, which is, I suppose, part of Ruislip, and we're going to head towards Joel Street. And the first of my little diversions, which does one of two things. It gives you a little bump in the road, extends the distance for me nicely, so that I can eke it out to around 16 kilometres, which is the normal size length of our courses and our races. They're not all exactly 16 kilometres, of course, but that's the target, so we all know what we're getting every time we race one. So as we at the top of Eastcote here, as we head towards the bottom of Joel Street, I always remember a conversation when I met somebody called Joel, and I said, oh, there's a street near here called Joel Street, and he said, oh, that's funny, I've got one near me. And it turned out, of course, that we live near each other. As we turn into Joel Street now, this is an unnecessary diversion. We're going to rejoin the road we were on. We're just going to go up this little bump and round a cricket ground. For those of you watching outside of the UK, cricket is this quintessentially British sport, played only, really, as far as I can make out, by countries that were once part of the British Empire or still part of the British Commonwealth, like India, Australia, New Zealand, and the West Indies. But there it is. Cricket is reportedly a national summer game. I'm not convinced it's quite as big as it might have been once. It certainly has to reinvent itself in terms of the 2020 game, which is a bit more exciting, packed into one day, a bit more like baseball is, and so on and so forth. The traditional 5-day match now rather less popular with the paying public, but held up as the true game by, of course, the traditionalists. So we turn round here. This is the loop around the cricket pitch. You'll see the cricket pitch is on the right. You can see it's slightly uphill, and I suppose having slowed down to do the junction, I've been probably caught in the wrong gear here because it slows down immensely. I don't think the hill is that tough. It's probably a lot easier than it looks here when you actually get on the RGT course. You can see the cricket sites on the right. Again, if you're not from the UK and you wonder what those big boards, those white boards sticking up are, what they are is they go behind the batsman, well, both ends. So basically the batsman can see the ball against the white of the screen. So if there were lots of colours behind, he wouldn't necessarily have to pick up the ball. You see a couple of them there, the white boards, sight screens. So they're just so that the batsman can pick out the ball when it's being hurled towards him by the bowler. In cricket, if you're not from the UK. So back on the road, we were on the one that runs parallel to the River Pin, and as I say, we are going to turn off this to the right and slightly go uphill again, but again it's not going to be a decisive hill. It might be an attack, it might lose somebody off the back of the pack, but it's not the decisive climb by any means. And again, on RGT in a peloton at pace, you should be able to sweep yourself up it fairly quickly. It's fairly short. We'll see in a moment. We're just going to go around a couple of bends and then a sharp right. There are some sharp right turns in this, and remember that RGT does automatically brake you when going around tight turns. We do smooth them to make sure that they're not ridiculously tight and bring everybody to a halt, but nevertheless they are there, and there's automatic braking in Wahoo RGT races, so it will slow you down as you take these right turns. I say right turns, sharp turns anywhere on the course, but as I say, smoothed for a decent response rather than a sort of jerk, jolt to a stop or anything like that. So coming up to the right turn here now, it is, as soon as you do this right turn, it's flat at the beginning as we go along a little brook, and then there's a sharp climb as we kind of leave the waterway on our right here, houses to our left. Again, this is one of these sort of places that you wouldn't actually believe you were riding through London if you just showing this excerpt of the video, and there are plenty of these little sort of places left in this, particularly around the edges of London, where for one reason or another they haven't been developed with buildings and houses, and have that feel of a country lane, but that's soon to be destroyed, that image, as we go back into the houses and up this little climb. You won't see the houses, of course, on RGT because you get stock scenery, so this will all be grass and trees either side of it. You see, just going up the hill here, again, not very long. It will slow people down, but as I say, in a decent sized peloton and the length of it at the speed you're going, you should be able to sweep over without getting dropped. Somebody will, but most of you should stay on each of those. The thing is, if you keep fighting to get back on every time you get slightly dropped, you start burning matches and start using up a lot of energy, and eventually there'll be one where you just haven't got that energy, or somebody attacks off the front just after you've done a supreme effort to get back on, and it just knocks you that little bit, so you can't do it. So now over that bump, and we're going to go back and head again. We're going to turn left, so we'll be heading eastwards like we were when we were following the pin trajectory, and head towards Harrow now. So we can come down to a junction in a minute where we're going to do this sharp left. This will appear like a sharp left turn. There won't be any road markings, of course, in the actual race, and here it is. And now we're heading eastwards again, so again it's going to be flat for quite a while now as we head towards Harrow. We're not going to go directly to Harrow, we're going to drop down Rayners Lane, and anybody who's ever looked at an underground map, or certainly the northwestern part of it in London, will see that there's a station called Rayners Lane, and anybody that's ever come out at Rayners Lane will wonder why it's called Rayners Lane, because there are no roads around the train station called Rayners Lane, which foxed me for years, but we are actually going to ride the whole length of Rayners Lane, and we'll see at the end that it actually stops before it gets to the tube station. So it's kind of, I don't know why it was named like that. I think railways, when they were built, of course, were built through green fields, and the settlements and a lot of the places probably across Europe and probably across the world a lot of settlements built up around the railways, which when they were going through the green fields probably named stations after the nearest place, because there was nothing there when they first built them. And this is quite often the case where you see some towns that haven't expanded and the railway stations outside of the town, whereas in other places the railway station's being built outside the town and the town's grown up around it. But Rayners Lane is, say, one of these odd places that seems to have a station that isn't actually on Rayners Lane, and it's odd, but I suspect it's a historical quirk. So a nice little bit of editing, and the traffic light goes magically from red to green. The amount of traffic lights we have to stop at in the UK, which are due to roadworks, is amazing. I say that not so much that I disapprove of the roadworks, it's just that if we have so many roadworks, why are our roads so bad? I think the short answer to that, don't write in please, but I think the short answer to that is half the roadworks are digging up pipes and electricity cables and things like that, rather than looking after the quality of our roads. As we see the bicycles painted on the road, this is the council's way of saying, yes, we're catering for bikes, we just paint pictures of them on the road. That doesn't actually, as far as I can see, give any advantage to a cyclist whatsoever, but it's nice to see them painted on the road, isn't it? Nice to know that our taxes are well spent on pictures. That would be objet d'art, I suppose. Anyway, we're heading towards the Harrow area. Rayners Lane itself, if it is an area, and I think it has become known as a bit of an area around the railway station, is really within the London Borough of Harrow. So we are into Harrow territory as we see another cyclist out early in the morning. So this was filmed quite early in the morning, just getting out before the main traffic, and it was interesting that the clouds there suggest it wasn't a great day. As soon as we finished filming this, the sun came out and it was a gloriously beautiful day. So if I'd waited another hour, we could have got a much nicer video, couldn't we? Never mind. Slightly going uphill here as we let's say head slightly southwards now, and again, as I keep saying, these are not really going to affect the race too much. They'll slightly thin pelotons. Don't worry if you do get dropped off the main peloton. What happens in these races is that generally people form sub-pelotons, peloton number 2, peloton number 3, and what this nicely does is has natural selection, so that you end up racing against people who are roughly the same standard as you, which makes for great little competitions and great sprints at the end. And I think the feedback we get is people really like this, that they might be battling for 30th position, but that battle for 30th and 31st became absolutely thrilling for those involved. And so this little hill now is probably a little bit steeper than some of the ones we've seen as we head down towards Rayners Lane. It's as I say, slightly undulating, but I'm not convinced it will be decisive in terms of the actual race winner. Heading down again now, so as I say, undulating, and it goes up over a bridge and so on and so forth. So just sort of rolling terrain here as we, as I say, head towards Rayners Lane. And you see the housing, still this sort of suburban London housing, probably built up sometime in the I would guess sort of 1930s onwards, which is when the real growth in this area began, as I believe. And you'll see certain styles of architecture quite a lot, where there's a mass building of bringing people out of London into these areas. Especially on the left there, you see the houses with the rounded bay windows. There's one on the right. Bay windows, very much a 1930s architectural style, and you can tell right around London, not just here, but where London was expanding in the 1930s, you get a lot of these bay windowed houses in the suburbs. The further out you go, the less you see of them. The houses become more modern as the expansion continued. So again, it's reasonably flat. It's going to be flat pretty much all the way now to Harrow Hill. I mean, there might be the odd gradient, but it's going to be nothing of any significance whatsoever, I would venture to say. And it's, as I say, it's very difficult to keep thinking about the architecture. There's a house that's not got a bay window on the right. So keep the running commentary of Northwest London's suburban architecture running. I say fairly flat, and I think this is a chance really just to get some speed up. So here we are, this is Rayners Lane, the area. Now you can see that we're going to turn left. We're at the end of Rayners Lane. This is where it ends at these traffic lights. If you carry on up that slight slope, which we're not going to do, the railway station is the building at the top. You can actually see it, but the railway station's up there, but Rayners Lane ends here. So the railway station actually nowhere near Rayners Lane. I think this area has become known as Rayners Lane, where these shops are, which of course, as I say, would have built up around the railway station when it came out here. We're going to go away from that. We're going to go towards Harrow, so we're going to turn left at these lights where we have to do some more editing, because Harrow traffic lights are always set to be red, and I think there's a quest in Harrow to make sure everything's slow. The speed limit here is 20 miles an hour. It's painfully slow, and I'm sure some of you will think that it's a good thing, and some of you will think it's a bad thing. I think there are advantages and disadvantages with it, but by the time you've been over all of Harrow's speed bumps, done 20 miles an hour, and stopped at all its traffic lights, it'd probably take you a day to pop out and buy a newspaper. But that's if you're a motorist, of course. So I suppose you'll all be retorting we should all be on the bikes, which is really what it's aimed at, isn't it? It's this is the policy, it's trying to get us out of cars and stop polluting and congesting. So there we are. We're going to have to stop at some more traffic lights before we turn right, but the right turn is where we now will start a long straight to the bottom of Harrow Hill. So again, this is still flat. I mean, it might have a very, very small gradient, but I'll call it flat. We're going to hit these traffic lights, turn right. It will be flat again down Shaftesbury Avenue, all the way to the bottom of the hill at Harrow, and that's when the race will explode, we predict. So here we are. I think a bit of editing is coming up to get us through these traffic lights quicker than Harrow Council would have us get through them. There we go. Abracadabra, we're through the lights. If only I could take this out when I was driving. So here we are, we go down Shaftesbury Avenue now. This is pretty flat and straight all the way to the bottom of Harrow Hill, and I think the thing is just keep yourself in the peloton, see how far you can get up the early slopes of the hill. It gets steeper at the top. It is going to be a testing one by our standards. It's by no means one of those really nasty climbs that people who specialise in hills would go out and seek, or people who run events that are definitely about hill climbs. We don't do that in our races. They are basically designed so that everybody can cope with them quite reasonably in a racing mode, but nevertheless you've got to put some tests in, and they will suit some people more than others. So by our standards, this is probably one of the testing hills. We have used it in other races, but not the way up the hill we're going today. So we've done Harrow Hill in the past, and it was quite interesting. It did break the race up, but we're going up a different version of it. There's several ways you can get to the top of Harrow Hill, and they're all quite interesting, and they're all quite I suppose testing and interesting in the way that if you do them in real life, you end up in this almost sort of, you know, it's like a time warp to town. This climb here is just basically over a railway bridge as we go over the Metropolitan Line railway. So just over that bridge, nothing special. It's not really a hill. It might show up on your RGT Wahoo profile. Anyway, as I say, we carry on and we head towards the bottom of the Harrow Hill. When you get to the top, as I say, it is very time warped. It is from a bygone era, probably something like, you know, something from the 1800s. All the buildings up there and the old school and everything. So it is very, very quaint and out of character with the rest of the area, which, as we've mentioned before, this is not an architectural lecture, but as you can see, you know, you still got these bay windowed houses, very typical of 1930s expanded London, and we just seem to disappear out of that into a sort of time warped, it's like a Star Trek, isn't it, where we get beamed up to a different world, as we'll see in a moment. The early slopes are slightly more gentle, and unsurprisingly the architecture, seeing as we're on that theme, is a bit more modern, but about halfway up the hill you'll start noticing that it becomes this old world, you know, old town from the 1800s, Harrow on the Hill, which is very in stark contrast to the rest of Harrow. So as we head up towards the Shaftesbury Avenue roundabout, and this will be the last stretch up to the bottom of the hill now as we follow the bus, and we pay a bit of leapfrog with the bus. I don't know about everybody else, but it always strikes me buses strain to overtake you, and then they'll stop at a bus stop, so you overtake them, and they'll strain to overtake you again, only to stop at the next bus stop. And you seem to play this game of leapfrog with buses. You overtake them at bus stops, and they sit behind you, overtake you, and then immediately stop at a bus stop after they've overtaken you, which I'm not sure if bus drivers actually think this one through, but I wonder if it's worth the effort of the overtake. Anyway, there is a slight gradient here. Look, it's not massive, but again, I suppose this is the throws, you know, the foothills. Here we go, there's the bus. And what does it do? Straight away, it stops at a bus stop. Well, that was worth overtaking me, wasn't it, Mr. Bus Driver? So, anyway, we continue towards the bottom of Harrow Hill. I suppose the slight gradient here denotes the bottom of the hill, but it's so faint that you wouldn't really notice. Now, these traffic lights that you can see coming up ahead of us are the bottom of the hill, so we're sort of on the I suppose the founding slopes of the hill as we go through these traffic lights. We're going to turn left, and as soon as we turn left, you will see the hill we're going to go up ahead of us. There we are. You see the building, the white building, and the timbered building. We're going up between those two, up Middle Road, and here we go. After another bit of swift editing and a bit of flash, this is the hill. It starts off with some false cobbles there, just there. As I say, as you go up, you watch some of these buildings. You can tell already they're a lot older than the 1930s buildings that we've been witnessing so far. So you can see this is part of a much older settlement on the hill. Whether it's built around a school or existed already, I really don't know. You see a nice little Fuller's pub. Go in there and get a pint of London Pride. And as I say, you can see already this is steeper than anything we've ever done, and it gets steeper at the top. So you know, beware. This is going to be where the race is decided. Now, there's a little respite we get in a moment as we go over this little brow, but don't worry, it ramps up again. So here we are. Little bit of respite as we get up that first little slope, but as I say, the steep bit's still to come as we get to this junction. Now, as I say, there's several ways you can go up. The way to our right is quite steep, but we chose this one today to give you a little bit more of this respite as we go along the side of the hill before turning right at the end of this and rejoining the gradient, whereas if we'd gone right there, we'd have been straight into steeper gradient. Again, you look at this, you can tell that a lot of these buildings are of a different era to the 1930s buildings we've been seeing before, and it starts to ramp up a little bit here, but beware, there is worse to come. So I think some of the shots in this reminded me, if any of you are familiar with the Age Baston, the classic shot of all the riders going up Hooflays and the hill there. In fact, there's lots of Belgian climbs that look like this, isn't there, where you just see them going up steep climbs between buildings. And I must admit, when I was riding up this, it did make me think of some of the Belgian classic climbs in those spring classic races. And this is what you got. And you can see this is already steeper. The video's going slower. Just look at your left at the brickwork and you get an idea of what the gradient looks like as we go up this. And as I say, this just reminded me of a classic Belgian climb, probably because I've been to Belgium and been up some of these recently. But this is the top as we go over the cobblestones, demarking the end of it. I say it's the top, it's not actually, it's the top of that road. We've still got a couple of metres left of climbing as we head towards Harrow School after some, again, false cobbles. I suppose they are cobbles, they're not false, but they're not the rough kind that we all adore out of Paris-Roubaix or anything, or the Tour of Flanders, Rondelander. So here we are, this is Harrow School, this is the top of the climb. Now, if you got here and you're on your own and you're in the lead, you need to put your foot down. This is a descent and you can really grab some distance if you get away on this descent. It's pretty much either downhill or flat all the way to the finish now. This should be a very fast descent. We're going back down the other side of Harrow Hill towards Harrow on the Hill station. Harrow on the Hill station is not on the hill, it's at the bottom of the hill. And again, it goes back to, I think they often named the station after a nearby settlement. So when they built the railway through fields, the nearest settlement would have been Harrow at the top of the hill. And I suspect the railway engineers didn't like the idea of taking the railway up and over the hill, so they built it around the side. As we come down to these traffic lights, which will magically turn green without any editing, of course. There you are. Brought my magic stick with me and just waved it at the traffic lights. So basically now we're going to go flat along here. We're following the railway line, the Metropolitan line, which is on our right. As I say, named Harrow on the hill, even though it's clearly at the bottom of the hill, but it's near the hill. And this is going to basically be flat or downhill pretty much all the way to the finish now. Just going to go along here up to the main roundabout in Harrow Town Centre, if you know the area, and turn left, and it'll take us back down to where we started the climb up Middle Road, Harrow on the Hill. So with not far to go, you really need to be putting all your effort in and looking around you, seeing who your rivals are. Is it going to be a bunch sprint? Is it going to, are you just two of you racing it out now? Is it going to be, do you sit on the wheels or do you try and break away? All those decisions will need to be made here. There's still, a couple of minutes, maybe a minute or so towards the finish. I'd say, probably more like a minute. This is Harrow Town Centre. You can see more modern buildings and some building works on your left. This is the roundabout, which I alluded to earlier. As we turn left, and this, as soon as we do this left, you really are in the last, 700 metres or so of the race, and this is where you need to decide your finishing strategy as we turn left here past the petrol station or gas station if you're from North America. You might argue that this is slightly uphill, and you'd probably be right, but I don't think this would be classified as a climb in any sense. I think everybody will be sticking together during this little bit, but certainly as we get over this little slight blip, it will be downhill all the way to the finish. And as I say, it finishes right at the bottom of Middle Road where we started the Harrow climb, and it will be fast, and I think your decisions will be based on who's around you, how you're feeling and things like that. But this is decision time, and whose strategy wins will be interesting. And certainly if you're going to try and do a solo, this is probably about the point you might want to do it, because I think any earlier, unless you can get some gap on that little slope there, any earlier is probably going to be too far out. So here we go. Now absolutely rolling because the gradient will be slightly negative. We're going to go past the cricket fields at the Harrow School, and here we are. So on your left you can see some more cricket fields. This has been more about cricket and architecture than it has cycling in some places, this video, hasn't it? But we like to show you the whole route. You can see the cricket fields and some of those sight screens, the white sight screens standing up there. So we're very close to the finish now. This is, as I say, the playing fields for the school, which is at the top of the hill, as we've seen earlier. And we are probably now less than 500 metres from the finish. There's nothing more to report really. As we get to the end of these playing fields, this is sort of more or less the last throws of the race, the last couple of hundred metres. When the fence on the end ends and we go back into buildings, that's going to be your final bit. But of course these landmarks will not be available to you on RGT, so as useful as they may be if you were running this in real life, which we couldn't because the traffic lights would ruin the race, this is going to be the final throws. I think look, it's very slightly uphill just on this last bit. Nothing, again, I mean, I'll almost describe it as flat, but you might argue it is downhill. But certainly the drop at the end to the traffic lights, which are coming up now. You're into the final meters of the race. You can see the traffic lights there, and the traffic lights are the finishing line. So we'll stop and wish you good luck during the race. See you at the start line.